Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It is JT and Sina on the mic. We thought we would take a seat, have a conversation, and talk a little bit about 5 years of the Red Nation podcast and 10 years of the Red Nation organization. Sina, can you tell us how you came about the Red Nation podcast? What's your origin story?
Well, it's very funny. It's nothing. I learned about Nick online. I followed him. We followed each other. I saw his book. I was like, "Oh, that's a cool book." I got it for a ride. I took a trip across the country, and I was reading it across the country, and then I just messaged him and said, "Hey, do you want to do an episode of my podcast?" My podcast was about 10 months old at that time, maybe a little bit less, and I would just cold message people. I mean, I still do. People who I have no idea who they like. I don't have any private previous connection to him, but I just messaged him, and then he said do it, and then he came on my show. And at the end, we talked. I mean, we talked about lots of different stuff. And at the end of that episode, I said, does Red Nation have a podcast? And he said, yeah, kind of, sort of, not really. We have one, but we want to kind of revamp it. And I said, I'm around. We can do this. And like fast forward 5 years, and you and me are having this conversation. Like it's a strange it's a strange phenomenon that like you can spend your entire life, like especially personally for me, like banging your head against a wall trying to like get a job, um, and trying to just trying to like make it in this world and following a script, and then one day you just kind of fall backwards into this whole relationship and professional media relationship that has like changed my life profoundly. I've learned so much from this show, from listening to all the hosts. Like I joke about this, but it's not a joke. I mean it. But I really have the best job on the world, like in the world. Nobody has a job as good as me. I get to listen to stuff, and because I'm the editor too of the Red Nation podcast, I don't have to make the real hard work is hosting. It's like hosting and coming up with the topic, doing the research, interviewing. Like that's hard work. I know from my own show. But I get to have all the good stuff, and I get to be the first person to listen to any episode. So it's like it's strange. It's like I get to open up a treasure every week, and I'm like, oh, what's in today's like treasure? What do I get to learn about? So for me, yeah, I have like a really selfish reason why I love this show. Just because it's like it makes my life better to like listen to this stuff and to learn this stuff, and it grew my whole worldview. I thought I was a tanky before editing Red Nation podcast, but man, that really working with you guys, it's the best. I would never trade anything these 5 years working with you guys, and I have all you guys to thank. You guys do all the content. I just clean up stuff.
I forgot I forgot in the introduction at the beginning. Crossover episode. Can you I think there are some listeners of our pod. I think there's some overlap of listeners here.
Yes, true, 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 true. Okay, I'll post this on my channel for sure.
That's awesome, Cena. And I find your origin story like very similar to mine and how I arrived at the red. It was actually in 2016 in the winter, or it was around the same time that everything was happening with No Dapple and Standing Rock. And at the time I was very just rugged, rowdy, wasn't very politicized, but the combination of Standing Rock and the Entrada movement happening in Santa Fe is what politicized me at the time. And later that winter, I think there was a series on Vice that came out called Rise, and Nick was in one of those episodes. And what he said just locked everything into place for me. What settler colonialism was, why everything was happening in Standing Rock the way it did, and everything just made sense. And I felt so compelled to reach out to Nick, and or not reach out, just look him up. I was like, this guy has to have like some kind of public profile or some kind of social media to follow. So I look him up on Facebook, and he is at UNM, like less than like 50 miles away from me, from where I was. And I was like, and then I short like less than half a year later, I moved to Albuquerque. I get invited to a Red Nation meeting, and then like there's Nick sitting up.
Yeah, I mean, that's and part of, I mean, both of our experiences, around Nick, but this a lot of people share a similar story that they learn about, an org or people or initiative, and it's something that wakes them up to, like, oh, there's a community out there for me. And I keep thinking about the fact that, as much as this episode, we're meant to celebrate our work, which we should. We should celebrate our work. We don't do it enough. It's a good show when we have millions of downloads of, to prove that. But I think at the same time is that we always have to be reflecting on the medium of podcasting, because it's changed a lot in these 5 years. I mean, from 2019, like, which is when we sort of relaunched the show, to right now, like, eons have gone by in internet time. Is that because, if you think about it too, is that 2019 was before, um it was 2019 was like before all of this, and like before, like, the rise of, obviously, COVID, and there's a huge sort of like podcast economy that probably kind of reached a peak sometime in like 2020, 2021, and then since then has sort of fallen off, I would say. I mean, there's probably more sophisticated, renderings of all that stuff that happened, but I would say that the fact that our show has survived this many years, the fact that we're producing content week in, week out, with almost no exception, I think, except for the last couple of weeks, we basically do a new show every week for over 5 years. Like, so, with the exception of like Christmas and stuff. So that is a remarkable run of content, because most podcasts die after 2-3 episodes, let alone they don't make it after a year, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we are probably one of the oldest, I think, native media podcasts, probably one of the most prolific, just because of the week in, week out dedication of our hosts. And, like, I have to really stress this, like, my own show isn't week in, week out. I go weeks sometimes without posting, like, I have no promise. But Red Nation Podcast, we do an episode every week. It's there for people. It's sometimes we do mixtapes, but otherwise it's like there is always something new in the pipeline. That itself is a remarkable accomplishment, I have to say. And it's really like you, Nick, Elena, Mel, our hosts. Like, this is, Myra, contributor, she's an interpreter, all kinds of people. The people who do, we have Levi. They did those great episodes. So, I have to also say, like, this is a lot of work that goes into just making the episodes. Editing is like the easy thing compared to like getting it all together.
Hi, everyone. This is Melanie Yazzie from Red Power Hour. This Native American Heritage Month, please consider empowering Red Media. Indigenous Peoples Day 2024 marks the 5th anniversary of the Red Nation podcast. Our podcast is a collaboration between the Red Nation and Red Media and is produced by Red Media. Red Media exists to fill the need for Indigenous media by and for Indigenous people. We are launching a GoFundMe campaign to gain support for our operational costs. Please consider empowering Red Media's work. You can also continue to support Red Media on Patreon, where you will gain access to bonus episodes of the Red Nation podcast, Red Power Hour, and many more benefits. Your support empowers Indigenous media and our podcasts. Thank you so much. Ahiahet.
Yeah, absolutely. The pandemic really created like the successful conditions for the Red Nation podcast in a lot of ways. Whereas like people had to stay home. Some of our first episodes were of the Friday night forums with A-Rock. And that itself was a response to people staying home at the very beginning of the pandemic. And so much great content came out of that. And not to toot our own horn, but I have been, you can quote me from our chats. I've said that the Red Nation podcast is the Beatles of Indigenous left podcasts. But actually, we're one of the few, if not the only, who actually go out there and do this and who contribute on a weekly basis. I'm very proud of our podcast. I'm proud to be a regular on the podcast, and it does take a lot of work. Thinking back to just the projects, the things that I've done on the show, the places that the show has taken me, and where the show has gone just in the last year in particular. We did kind of hit, I would say, maybe like a plateau in the last couple years. We kind of like hit a peak maybe in like 2022, 23, around there. And we keep it steady. We still get thousands of views and listens every week, but um part of uh part of like the material conditions happening now, um within the last year specifically, have made the podcast so much more important than before. I would say when everything happened since October 2023, in combination with the shooting in Espanola, what was happening in Palestine, all the election hoopla, like the media work has become so much more important. And I think that this last year in particular, it really just like created an entirely new standard for how we talk about things and how we report things. I remember I think it was like November or October and November of 2023, when things were getting just ugly there in the beginning in Gaza and Palestine. Like, there was a duty to tell the truth, and there still is, obviously, but it was then where we're hearing about 40 beheaded babies, mass rape, like all of these just blatant lies by all these quote unquote credible news sources, and it was just taken as truth, and they remained credible the entire time. And you, the Red Nation podcast being or having to respond to those kinds of things really like made us shine as like a voice of clarity in the room, of just somebody out there taking the initiative and responsibility and duty to just have counter narratives that just completely cut through all of these ideas of settler colonialism that are presented to us in mass media and just about everywhere. And I hear from a lot of fans, a lot of comrades, that they go to the Red Nation podcast because they need that voice of clarity. And I personally, when I'm like down in the dumps, like listening to the Red Nation podcast for what I'm like down in the dumps about, is what offers that clarity for me in a lot of ways. And you're right, Sina, we do have the best job in the world. We as I work on the podcast, but I'm also just a sincere fan. And I've been a sincere fan since the very beginning, when Nick was out there with his physical Zoom recorder walking into the office. I'm on episode 2 of or Who Was the Red Nation podcast part 2, and he came and he recorded me and a couple other gals at the office. I listened to that episode a while, like some weeks ago. It is so funny, like, oh, how I've changed.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. Yeah. It's like a time capsule. We were all so much younger. And like that was also 2019. We had pre-pandemic, like 3 years of Trump, 3 years of like Stephen Miller, like press conferences. Everybody's like raging. Everyone's disgusted. Liberals are like in a tizzy, calling themselves the resistance. Like people were having like Bernie mania in the midst of all of this. Like this was a psychotic time in all of this. Like it's hard to even go back and like narrate. And what's funny too is that like I associate like what was the stupid thing, the January 7th thing. Like we did those January 7th episodes, and they were just like it. I mean, I know that was like a year. That was 2021, right? That wasn't 2020, but it feels like from a distance 2020 is this like strange psychotic fever dream, and then it ended in this 2021 like January 7th or whatever 6th thing, and everyone, like liberals included, just like everyone's brains melted. But because liberals were back in charge, suddenly all of that like panic around like all the problems in the country was now gone. And now liberals had taken over the adults in the room, even though their policies didn't change. And in fact, it worsened. Conditions worsened. The economy got worse. Like foreign policy got more neocon. The Democrats continued the Trump agenda. But for whatever reason, and partly because this is a reflection of how much like sway liberals hold over like the kind of infosphere, is that level of panic went down. And I swear, also the podcast economy started to deflate, because that podcast economy was also pretty like it got pretty big during COVID and probably reached its peak. But preceding that for a whole decade was the like, oh, mattress and underwear and coffee of the month and bacon of the month and whatever bullshit thing that like the podcast economy was like floating on that week. Like it was a weird dance. I remember listening to podcasts at that time. Now there are no advertisers at all anymore. All that market just completely dried up and stuff. So there is a huge kind of change in the economy around what we do. Thankfully, we have like dedicated patrons and dedicated supporters who listen to the show, who are, and we have grassroots support, because that means we're shielded from this kind of economy. But I'm interested, what are some other big things you noticed in this time? Some sort of tectonic shifts?
Well, speaking of, I think that in the last year, the responsibility to report the truth and to offer counter narratives for what's going on in this liberal shithole is like desperately needed. And because it's desperately needed, it is like a sincere threat to the status quo. And I don't know if this is, well, I don't know. I'm not going to name it by name, but there was a document that came out by a right wing Republican backed like, tree branch or something. I don't know, but this like right wing group came out with a PDF just detailing all the organizations who have been doing pro-Palestine work in the last year, and they listed them by their threat, how much threat they pose, I guess. So and then this is also hand in hand with the House bill that recently just passed that people are calling the nonprofit killer, where the U.S. Treasury will take away your 501c3 nonprofit status if you are guilty of supporting terrorism, aka if you support Palestine. That's why this bill came out. And so this whole list, I believe, is like built on that or built hand in hand with that. But I found it extremely revealing that the Red Nation and Red Media are both the only organizations listed on that list who are native, who are indigenous organizations, who are actively pro-Palestine, who are reporting on Palestine the truth, and just like against the status quo, I guess. And I think that like that in itself is just like almost like a badge of honor. Yes, it's really scary. Yes, it's like it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess Red Media is like under fire, is gonna maybe get its 501c3 status taken away come inauguration day. Who knows? But joke's on them. We are grassroots funded, and we actually hardly even use our 501c3 status like how other orgs properly use it. We have no money. We're entirely funded by the people and by patrons and by our GoFundMe that we have going on right now. Please go donate. And and I think that you know, it's just sort of like a marker of like how truly how truly truthful we have been this whole time. I mean, this is a new development. This is all very recently having had happened, but that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
I mean, I think in all of this, I'm realizing that like the part of the strategy of counterinsurgency that I think is just part of the background noise of life in like the West is that, and I think the ruling class has this kind of, let's just say, like kind of software set up that instantly attacks, like that studies and surveils and then works towards undermining any grouping of people who cross certain sort of ideological red lines, right? Is that one of the, and this is like a thing that Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci studies, that one of the things that there is a kind of range of acceptable ideas that capitalist society puts in front of you, and you're allowed to kind of wander within that range, and sometimes that range changes over time and they adapt to different circumstances, but ultimately there are these red line issues. And what's been clear for over a year, I mean, it's clear before that too, but extremely clear, is how intensely they consider the line of openly supporting Palestinian resistance, an indigenous Palestinian resistance to Zionist settler colonial violence, right? Even just stating those words in that order for some people is considered a kind of thought crime, right? And so the fact that Red Nation Podcast is the place where we unabashedly, where the people who come on the show, guests and hosts, unabashedly share their views of the justness of Palestinian resistance and how it is like this, and how we should be talking about all these critical things that our media is not only lying about, but ultimately their bigger work is to obfuscate and simply just ignore, right? And so like the crimes, the genocide, the starvation, the siege, these are things that independent media have been covering, that our media class have been actively covering up, right? And so at the outset of all this, you have to remember that independent media, like I include my shows in this, we are instantly in a position of war with the ruling class, just by nature of our opinions, just by nature of the subject matter we discuss. Like you go to war with an establishment that has billions in its pockets, and you're just like some show that publishes to a few platforms, and you have, you count your views in the, under 10,000, and you have your supporters and stuff. And it's like we have like little, like tugboats or little motorboats, and these people have like cruise liners, and yet they go out of their way to chase us, to harass us, to threaten your funding, to attack your people. Like how many episodes have resulted in our hosts getting death threats? I mean, the fact that the Onyate shooting was the second shooting that like a crazed anti-Red Nation protester was like, this is the second one involved with that. I mean, that to me is a sign that this is like, that, sure, the things that we're saying are radical enough to like warrant this kind of insanity. And like, if you're the conspiracy minded like me, you think that, yeah, this is like a kind of American Gladio that finds organizations that don't toe the line and then finds ways to, they attract a certain kind of fanatic, like fascist response, the way that Red Nation has. But I have to say this, like, and then I don't think we say this enough. Did those shootings slow down our work? Like, no, not at all. Like they were like, literally we were posting the next week, because the next week was October 7th after the Onyate shooting. I'm thinking the next week we're just like right back at it. Everyone's like still traumatized from what happened, and we're just right back at it. And it's an amazing, because like where else will they get this kind of information? Where else will they go? Like we are isolated. I mean, it sounds negative to say this, but it just means that we have to remember that like we are in this alone and with our fans and like our networks, and that's it.
And our comrades. Yep. By the way, the episode that Sina's talking about is titled "You Ain't a Leftist If You Haven't Left Yet." With Muhammad Al Kurd. That was a very iconic episode.
And unfortunately, it got kind of swallowed up in the post October 7th, just like madness. So, like, I would say to people, go revisit that episode. It's a fascinating episode. It's horrible what that episode kind of got overshadowed by, because it would have been, if you guys had the space to really, and like kind of mind frame to like really dig in, and you did really, because you did interview him before the shooting as well. But it was right, if I'm getting mixed up, yeah.
Well, okay, so it's actually kind of a crazy timeline because Muhammad Al-Kurd came to town that week, and in Espanola, it was a Monday, we went to Espanola to the press conference, and then on that Monday it was like decided that we're going to still show up on Thursday when they're planning to erect this colonizer monument. And so after we get back on that Monday, we immediately go to the office and meet Muhammad Al-Kurd that evening, and then he agrees with us to go out to Espanola again on Thursday. So then Muhammad Al-Kurd was actually there with us at the shooting on Thursday. And last time we saw him was at the Indigenous Peoples Day webinar that we hosted back in October. And he said this multiple times throughout the year that I've seen or heard him, but he's like, I've been meaning to talk about the shooting, but everything in Palestine had happened. And what is kind of like really remarkable about that episode is that it actually represents the last moments, seconds of whatever existed before October 7th. Whatever state of the world that Palestine existed in, whatever state of the world that indigenous people throughout the Americas, throughout the world existed in, was completely different. And it's like the last seconds of that era. Very, like, yeah, really, really remarkable episode. I actually wanted to know, Sina, what episodes come to mind to you, about that, as our editor and producer? What are like the most remarkable episodes that you've come across, or were significant like that?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, there was a lot, those early conversations in 2020. I think that like Nick did from the heyday of, from like the deep days of COVID lockdown. There are some fantastic ones. I mean, it's hard. There are some ones that stick out in my mind. There's the episode we did about the murder of Anime Aquash. Um, it was called "Remembering the Reign of Terror," and that was people still watch it a lot. It was primarily a documentary style episode, because Nick went to this memorial and had a bunch of interviews with people, and then it's like Saturday afternoon, he like sends me a link in our chat, and he's like, here's some footage, go. And I had no warning, I had no planning. It was completely like MacGyver episode, and it still gets comments to this day. So that's one of the ones I'm really proud of. It's a big mess. I had a catastrophe with the hard drive that it was on. I've learned so much doing this podcast. Unfortunately, I was a big time amateur when I started, and I like had terrible practices, like data practices and whatever, and saving things that would have the same name for every file. Like it was terrible. I had no idea what I'm doing. But another, I would say too, there was a lot of early episodes of Yoded. Yoded is one of my favorite series. It's personally like Nick hasn't done one in a while. It's been a little bit. The last one I think you did, uh, with we did it on the love means whatever, the lady who drank herself to death with the colloidal silver.
Yes. Love has one. The
Yes.
something of something about Mother
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, Mother God. Yeah, that stuff. Those are fun. Those are fun
A
episodes.
lot of comments. Oh, I'm sorry, we get a lot of comments on the Yoded episodes, and who have watched these documentaries, and then we get comments that are like, "Oh, can you watch this documentary? Can you watch this documentary and do a Yoded episode?" And then I was just a few weeks ago when Ramona Emerson was releasing her book. Her first stop was the Gallup Flea Market, so I went out there to go sell books with her, and the guy who was making all those comments. He's just this random Navajo uncle who came up to us at the Gallup flea market. He's like, "Hey, I really like those
That's
Yodered
great.
episodes. Can you do one on this one?" And I was like, "This is the guy." Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
I
yeah.
mean, no. Because I think it's interesting is that, like, in some ways, podcasts as a form, they fulfill they fulfill a lot of different they fulfill a lot of different functions that media historically has filled, that because of the sort of insanely monopolistic control that and that media companies have kind of swallowed each other up with such rage in like the last 30 years, that has sucked out a lot of the fun part of consuming media, that it turned, like, all radio stations now are like algorithm. It's like that Simpsons joke, is that they threaten them with like the DJ 3000. There is a DJ 3000 now. It's not a joke. Like, it's like, that's why you tune in anywhere, they all sound the same. Something as banal as a radio station, think about that. They took that away from you to just save a few bucks, to save a few salaries. So I feel that in some ways podcasting fulfills that kind of niche that was left behind by these conglomerations that happened, that really accelerated in the 2010s, that really, the so-called, remember the pivot to video that happened in mid 2010s, like when all these sites started deleting all their articles and just saying, okay, we're only doing videos now, that's all we're doing. And then it was the like pivot, and then there was like the move to mobile. Everything became like mobile dimensions, like no one even cares about horizontal video anymore, it's worthless. So like these are all things that I've experienced as like a podcast producer, because like podcasts have remained stable basically since day one. It's an RSS feed that you upload an MP3 file to. Like, it's pretty simple technology. There's nothing really you can reinvent. Now, people can do different kinds of podcasts, and I feel that one of the successes of our show, and if people are interested in starting their own podcasts, I would say that learn something from Red Nation, insofar as we have different kinds of shows on our podcast. So we have the traditional interview show, like that's my podcast basically, is 99% interview shows, me talking to one or two or sometimes three people, but that's rare. But we also have the kind of group conversation, vibing with each other show. And then we also have the, what I like to call, kind of close reading shows, where you examine a text and you like chew it over and share this stuff. Like, and we have, documentary style shows. So really, what I think something to learn about that is that if you're starting a podcast, you don't have to decide on a format and stick to it. That if you have cool stories and cool ways to convey that, they can all go on the same feed, and your listeners will I think will be better for it, because they have the same thing week in and week out. Let me tell you, it's hard for me on my show sometimes. I really like have a hard time sometimes, because it's like, what can I say that I haven't said before? What interesting thing can I bring to this conversation that I haven't said before? I don't feel like we have that problem with Red Nation. I mean, partly because we have a big team of people who contribute, which helps a lot, but also because we do have these different styles of shows that do, let's say, scratch different itch for different kinds of audience, because there's not one kind of podcast listener out there. And it's really our jobs as producers to like create content that appeals to like the broadest number of people possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as a fan of the podcast, that's what I've always enjoyed. And that's what a lot of our listeners enjoy too. Like, we have Red Power Hour. That used to be a show just by itself, but it started off, I believe, in the Red Nation podcast. Then it became its own show with its own RSS feed, and then we put it back on the Red Nation podcast because it just didn't. For Elena and Melanie to record on a weekly, monthly basis is a lot of work, and but when they do produce a show, it's a hard hitting one. Everybody loves it. Everybody's like, "Oh, Melanie and Elena are back!" Like, always in the comments, always on, yeah. But thank you. Yeah, I really always appreciated that about our show too.
maybe you can talk about this for you. You've also done a lot of live reporting. You've done a lot of field work. I'm thinking the work you did for that Al Jazeera doc, but also more recently from what happened in Tuba City. Maybe you can talk a little bit about like your experiences doing that. Like I'm trying to remember the first time you went on a kind of recording adventure. I feel like it was 2020 maybe, but I don't know. Like, what have you learned in all those adventures?
Thanks, Sina. Yes. So, I don't remember exactly the first episode I sort of did like as a guest host. Um, but sometime after I got hired in Red Media, we got an email from Al Jazeera who wanted to record a documentary on a like frontline style action. And my response at the time was like, you can't plan that. Like you can't just be like, I'm gonna record frontline. Can you
Yeah.
guys do it? And so I was like, well, and this is when I was first beginning having my first realizations about how important the media work was. And at the time I was also like, well, you can't really tell the story of Red Nation if we're not telling the story of like the greater conditions, material conditions in New Mexico. So I was like, why don't we just go on a podcast tour? Like we're already doing the media work, we already have all these comrades we collaborate with, and so that's what we did. You can still find it. I think it's still in like our links, in our link trees somewhere. If not, we can, I don't know. But anyway, so they ended up recording us, me and Kyan driving around all over New Mexico, and then they actually did get the footage that they wanted. There was unfortunately a really heinous police murder that had happened in Albuquerque, and we went and we responded and we were in the streets, and so they did go ahead and get that footage. But like you were expressing earlier, just the missteps of being of doing things when you're doing them early on and making mistakes and being messy and all of those things. Ugh, there's so many things I would have done differently. There's so much more like organization I would have done, but it's just all part of the process, that's just, and thankfully we have our listeners who are still with us despite despite our mistakes and our
Yeah.
growth. But thank you for being with us through our evolution, because all of that experience really just got me better at doing all of this, at going out there in the ground, live recording. I from there on, always made media a priority, always wanted to get things on the Red Nation podcast. So there was an event, I wanted to show up there with my crappy little camera, my crappy little mic, and just through, let's see, that happened what, in 2022, I believe. So just in the course of 2 years, like I've upgraded a lot of equipment, I bought a lot of equipment, I've professionalized a lot of the ways that I do things. And so this and then again, like I'm just going back just a year from when everything popped off in Palestine, and I would say definitively my media work completely shifted definitively at the November 4th um first national march for Palestine out in Washington DC. That was the big change for me. And when I really just buckled down, just getting that footage of Melanie and the speech that we had all written together. And that was the first time. So I had already made a TikTok channel for Red Media, but not a lot of people really understand what Red Media is. Not a lot of people understand that it's the media offshoot of the Red Nation. But what people do know is the Red Nation podcast. So I created a collaboration channel on TikTok that is the Red Nation podcast. Please go follow us. And I posted that video of Melanie performing that speech for the first time as the Red Nation podcast. And that video is, to this day, is still getting views. It is the number one viewed video on that channel. And that's when like that's when it all changed. I was like, oh my god, like TikTok, short format videos, and it's what's popular. It's what the kids are eating, and so, um, but not only that, like the content of what was said was extremely important, especially at the time. And so, going forward, the next big media event that we did was the in December. I think it was like December 9th or something. It was the teach-in in Minneapolis. And that one was also another really big media moment because our footage with our logo on it and everything was clipped and put on The Hill and Fox News because of all these right wingers being so afraid of indigenous people and so afraid of indigenous people who are hand in hand with Palestinians. And unfortunately, that was the one that got Melanie doxxed, and she faced a lot of repercussions for that because she was the one who was clipped, and she's the one with the big fancy professor job at a university, and so that's who was targeted from that panel. I was on that panel too. Dee and Nick were also on that panel. And but again, like it was the influence of what was said, the hard truth that frightened and shook these settlers to their core. And they put our footage and our logo and broadcasted it to millions of people on the lighter side. And so and then on the bright side, sorry Melanie. And then from there it was just like I don't really recall like all of the everything we did. I know we were doing a lot of podcast recording in the in the office when we still had the office. We did that really we did the media coverage for Mackenzie Johnson's trial, where Mackenzie, that's one of our comrades sibling, who back in I think it was like 2018 is when that APS teacher cut off the end of a native student's braid and called Mackenzie a bloody Indian. We're the only ones who did reporting for that, for what was happening and where the case was going. And then it's kind of like that's the case for everywhere that that we go and do reporting. It's like D will give me a call and say, hey, let's go do this, and I'm like, fucking go. So we go, and we go to Tuba City, we go to Window Rock, we go tomorrow we're actually going to be flying out to Boston because we're going to go report at the National Day of Mourning. And it's just like we're going to these places physically now where there is a lack of reporting, but also just like um yeah, I mean, yeah, just lack of reporting. Like it's extremely important, and I've said in the last couple weeks. I mean, there was that Walls when we went out to Navajo Nation for the Walls campaign stop. Um, I was like, guys, like I don't know what you guys are gonna do. I'm not gonna stop anyone from doing anything, but I have to put my hands up and be totally neutral on anything that's gonna happen and do just the media work, because the media work is half of anything that's going to happen. And that's exactly what happened when we were at the Walls campaign. And a lot of people thought that was a very powerful episode because we are the only ones talking about just just how heinous it was to have Joe Biden give this fake apology at the Gila River Nation, and then for Walls the very next day to go campaign for the Democratic Party in Navajo Nation, and then brutalizes Navajo people while they're there. And this wasn't the Navajo Nation police like how a lot of people are saying. This was the Navajo Nation police being deputized by the campaign people, but also the staffers themselves. It was the Walls staffers who were doing this. And absolutely nobody reported on this. Nobody saw the nobody saw like the dissolvement of tribal sovereignty in real time, and that needed to be named, that needed to be said, and we reported on it. And it's just like the way that this has evolved and is on this trajectory of evolving even more, it makes life worth living. Like it really does. It really gives me like such purpose and responsibility to do that for people. And I think that like that's just been like the number one lesson that I've learned just in the course of a year, is just how reporting and how telling the truth, offering analysis from an indigenous left perspective, how important it really is and is needed. And I'm going to say that over and over again because I really don't have the words. I'm in the middle of it. Like I'm like maybe I'll write a memoir some years down and really be able to summarize what this all really means in hindsight. But right now in the thick of it, we're like in the middle of just going up and up and up with it because uh just this year alone, I would say there was the Tuba City thing, there was the Walls campaign, oh, there was the action in Farmington remembering 1974. These events specifically all happened within the course of maybe like 3-4 months. Those ones are all specifically, I made a new format on TikTok, these TikTok videos that I'm making. These when we go to these physical places, and this isn't on the podcast. If you want to see the day of the report backs I'm doing on TikTok, please go. They're like on our reels, but mainly on our TikTok channel. These get like, I mean, sometimes like the Tuba City views, the two videos I put out combined got like over 250,000 views from Tuba City because nobody was talking about it. And this is a whole entire different format that I'm experimenting with, but it's proving to be really successful. And that's what I see as like the what I'm doing going to be doing this week when we're going out to Plymouth, Massachusetts, and reporting on the National Day of Mourning. Nick did a podcast episode on that one, which we're going to repost this week for our Throwback Thursday. But I do plan to post a report back video the day of on No Thanks No Giving, National Day of Mourning. So this Thursday, if you want to see that, please follow our TikTok page. I'll be posting something.
Justine, that was a really good explanation, I think, and underscoring of the importance of not just like Red Media and Red Nation, but in our Nation podcast, but I think in general, like independent media is it. That's all we have between us and these monstrous ghouls who run the mainstream media. Like that's it. You have an army of weirdos and cranks just running around with cameras and like just trying to catch little glimpses of history. And then we like post it just like frantically, like with mistakes, and it's all ugly, and we try our best. But like this is like, but without us, that's it. You would just be like today's latest fake like controversy online reported on by your pathetic, like talk show host interviewer. Like that's what they want from us. They want us just like to be sitting passive, like fine, like they want viewers. They don't want people who are engaged in these worldly issues, who are making connections. Like before working with Red Nation, of course I had obviously put together the indigenous people's histories of Palestine and the history of, and it was actually largely thanks to Nick's book. Actually, it was pretty late in the game, which is shameful for me, which is like, telling on the kind of education that I had, that in all these years of studying Palestine, I hadn't put together the like larger mosaic of like, oh, this is part of a wider story, Sina, that like you're implicated in too, just by your fact of your residence on stolen native land, which is called Canada. Like these are things that I had pieced together kind of, but it was only like meeting you guys, listening to these connections, listening the way also how you guys talked about Palestine, because it was completely different than how I had, than I had experienced it, largely from, a kind of whatever Middle Eastern framework, whatever you want to call that. So finally, and that for me has been like the best part of this job, like millions of downloads, and I've contributed my little corner of that to like fixing stuff and making it more listenable, and putting on the theme music and stuff and presentability. Like I'm proud that that's what like my work has gone towards, that people can listen, like just that teach-in. Like that's an amazing conversation that is like almost a year old, but just as relevant today as it was when it was recorded. And that's why they get so mad. The chuds, they pick these videos on purpose. It's not some random lottery that Red Nation just keeps winning over and over again. These are red lines that you're not allowed to cross. You cannot make these connections. You're not a good, and there's a lot of liberals, native and settler alike, who don't want to hear this stuff, who feel uncomfortable being reminded that like the Nakba is a global story. It's not just Palestine, like even like pro-Palestine libs, right? Who don't want to hear the story of the sort of ongoing Nakba here for how many communities, how many different hundreds of nations of like native like territories and histories that have been overwritten by settler colonial violence, by house demolitions, by child kidnapping. All of these stories are painful to hear. Like our podcast is not the most fun podcast to listen to some episodes. Like it's kind of serious, hard stuff. And but ultimately, like we can hold, I feel that we can hold our heads up high and say, while the vast majority of people in our societies were just looking the other way, who were just ignoring it, living their lives, accepting their rewards, giving their papers and stuff, we actually stood up and said like, hey, there's something very wrong with this. There's a genocide happening. It's part of a larger genocide against this people, which is itself part of a larger war by settlers on native people, and it's destroying the planet, and it's destroying Palestine, and it's destroying everything we consider good in this world. And like we're raising a stink about it. And to me, that's your only job. If you're a conscious person in this world, if you have access to these publication resources the way we do, that's all you can do. And I really encourage people in whatever capacity they have to start their own shows. I know it's not for everyone. It requires a certain kind of extra time and connections to people, whatever, and interviews. But I would say is that we're going to see increased repression in the media sphere, that we've enjoyed a relatively, I mean, shootings and attempted murder notwithstanding of our hosts, we've enjoyed a relatively safe ride in all of this. But I feel that we're getting into the precipice of real ugliness, where they're just going to be stomping out people quietly or loudly to like send a message. And yeah, like this election, Trump's election, this new psychotic Congress that's coming, even more psychotic, like this empire's death will not be ugly, and it will lash out at those voices it deems to be guilty of thought crimes. So I kind of want to close with that for myself. What final message would you have, Justine, for our listeners and our people watching this?
I am not sure what I have to close. I feel like everything in this journey I'm not going to realize until it's in hindsight. Um, but I think what I am finding myself doing is sort of bracing myself and preparing for the upcoming state repression in doing something like this. I think it's very um I mean, shit, like in the whole assault on Gaza and in Palestine that's been happening, the people that are taken out are like journalists, are on top of everybody else, but like the way that they target journalists to suppress the truth, I think is very like that is the nature of the settler state. And it is not directly happening to us in the way that we're being sniped through our windows or anything like that, but the way that we're being targeted, we're being blasted, I think we'll only I hate to say it and I hate to curse ourselves, but it just seems like what's ahead in terms of like you know, them trying to remove our 501c3 status, them trying to remove people from having access to being able to do this kind of thing, and to really just to silence us. And I think that we just we really mean it when we say that your support means like everything, because your support completely funds this entire project. And so um please continue to support the Red Nation and Red Media. Please go support our GoFundMe, which is listed in all of our bios on all of our recent episodes, and we will be running that GoFundMe through the end of the year. And that is just for operational costs to keep Red Media going. And Red Media is who produces the Red Nation podcast, and the Red Nation will always be the grassroots intellectual direct work that we report on. And I just also want to thank our listeners for supporting the show this long. Thank you to all of our fans. Thank you to all of our supporters. Thank you to all of our comrades. Thank you to our hosts. Thank you to Sina. Thank you to Daisy and Musa and Wilma who support our hosts.
Kyan, the socials king.
Oh, Kyan. Shy Kai. Yes. So
Thank you, Justine. Thank you for everything you do.
Oh.
You bring great energy. You were a bit nervous as a host the first few times, but like I've been really like watching you get more and more confident as a host, and like taking stuff and doing stuff, producing, going out into the field. Like it's awesome. Like it's like this is like it's not anybody, like a lot of people can do this. You don't have to be like some wizard to go and report important stuff. You don't have to like be a documentarian to go and talk to people about important stuff in your community. I really underscore that. And in the end of the day, that's what you guys do. You go to your communities or the communities of people and you go and talk to people and you record it and then you send me the file and then we upload it. It's as simple as that. There's no complicated pitch process. There's no like corporate committee of like, oh, how is this to our brand? There's just like fly by the seat of your pants gonzo journalism. And like if there was more of this, if there was like 10,000 Red Nation podcasts, we would be in a better shape ideologically. I feel that there would be at least an attempt to kind of dial back the monopolistic control that these freaks hold. That so many people sitting there wasting their time on Joe Rogan mumbling about whatever stupid thing he learned about this week. And there's like amazing knowledge out there for you to just consume out there for free. It's out there. So I don't know. It's something to think about. This is my own podcasting frustration. It's like I'm a small boat on this freaking massive ocean, and you just like confront this colossal thing. But I guess that's always a struggle when you're independent.
Thank you, Sina. And I know who you're speaking to when you say that. Like, go out and get the content and just put it out there. But I know who you're speaking to when you say that. But what came to mind of me when you say that was it's like let's counter narrative the talk to kind of podcast. We don't need to be giving people any more brain worms than we already have. Like,
it's true. Yeah, it's true. It's true. I guess it's like, for me, sometimes I think that podcasting can be what and podcasting generally, kind of broadly speaking, including video aspect on YouTube, is that it could be a kind of democratic media form. But unfortunately, what happens is that you get into the algorithms, and really you're just like serving these algorithms, and you have to respond to them because the internet's so tipped in their corners. But that's a conversation for a wider. At the very least, we can hold this show up. We can talk about the shows, the work we do, and the work of our comrades. And yeah, thank you to the listeners. Thank you to the viewers. Thank you I have to say again, thank you to the hosts who are just the best. And 5 years of doing content, I love them all. I know their voices. I know all of you guys. I know you all from your greetings, how you say goodbye, how you laugh. Like, I spend the most time with all of you in the podcast form. So it's, you get to know people, and it's, it's an interesting line of work. So thank you again, Justine. We can wrap this up here, and please consider supporting the show. As Justine said, consider supporting Red Nation, the Patreon. Go to our channel, like our stuff, anything else, comments, just say, hey, what's going on? Like that helps too. That kind of stuff works. It games our stuff. But yeah. So anyways, thank you, Justine. And we'll see you in post-production.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll press stop.
All right. We'll see y'all later. Thank you, Sina. Thank you, comrades.